All right, so in this video, we are going to talk about how to solve rational equations when the equation that you get after you cross multiply is a little more complicated than just a linear equation like we had in the last video. Hope you like my new room, my new settings here, but that's not why you're watching. You're watching to get into some math. So let's take a look at some math. The learning objectives for this are identical to the learning objectives from the last video. Be able to solve rational equations by cross multiplying, and then understand the importance of checking answers. In the last video, we talked about how to solve cross multiplying when the equations turned out to be relatively simple. And so in this video, we're looking at slightly more complex. Okay, now there won't be anything in this that we haven't already learned. In fact, there's a part of the video where I'm going to kind of go a little bit fast. When we get to that part, if you feel like you need more review, I'll have some links in the description for this to help you get some of that review. All right, now the other thing that we got from the last video is a 4-step process for doing this. I've written this out in a little more detail than it was in the last video, but this is the same 4 steps that we talked about in the last video. If you're going to cross multiply, you have to start with something that's called a proportion. And a proportion is just an equation that has fractions on both sides. And so that's our first step. If it doesn't look like that, the first thing you want to do is rewrite it so that it looks like 2 fractions that are equal to each other. When you're doing that, if it's possible to simplify one of the fractions, then that's a good idea. It'll make the rest of the problem easier. All right. I will say in many of the problems that we'll do, step 1, either you'll be able to skip it altogether, or it'll be pretty straightforward, like, taking a number and putting it over 1 in order to turn it into a fraction or something like that. So it'll be pretty straightforward. Step number 2, cross multiply and then simplify what happens when you cross multiply. All right, so that's a pretty straightforward step. And then you're going to solve, and after you solve, you're going to check your answers, looking for extraneous solutions. Remember, this is very important because it's possible for you to do all of your algebra 100% correctly on steps 1 through 3 and still get an answer that actually doesn't work. And that's what we call an extraneous solution. It's an answer that algebra says should be part of the solution set, but it's actually something extra. All right, so everything I've just talked about was review from the last video. Let's get into an actual problem. So here is the problem that we're going to do right now. We're going to solve the equation x over x plus 3 is equal to 10 over x plus 11. And you can see I already have a simplified equation on this side. I already have a simplified equation on this side. Those 2 fractions are equal to each other. I'm sorry, I misspoke. This isn't a simplified equation. This is a simplified fraction. And this is a simplified fraction. And those 2 fractions are equal to each other. So step 1 is already done with us. Step 2 then was to cross multiply and simplify. So what I'm going to ask you to do is pause the video long enough just to do step 2, and then resume the video and we'll talk about step 3 together. All right, so hopefully you've already cross multiplied. Remember, it doesn't matter which order you do this in, as long as you're multiplying the bottom of one side with the top of the other side. And it doesn't matter which order you do them in, as long as that's the process, do a top to a bottom, okay? So if I do this, whatever color this is, teal, I guess, if I do this teal one first, I've got a 10 times an x plus 3. And then if I do this pink one, or whatever color this is, I'm going to have an x times an x plus 11. Okay, and then of course in between those 2 things there's still this equal sign that doesn't go away. It's going to be there for the whole problem, so be careful to make sure you don't lose that. So that's my actual cross multiply step. Then when I simplify, I'm going to distribute. I'm going to have to do that on both sides of the equation. So on the left side, when I distribute, I'm going to get a 10 times x and a 10 times 3. So that gives me a 10x plus 30. On the other side, x times x is equal to x squared, and x times 11 is equal to 11x. All right, so that's my first 2 steps. Step 1 was already done for me. Step 2 is cross multiply and simplify. Now we have to solve this equation. But what's going to be important on this step is that you recognize what kind of equation we're working with. And this is an equation where I have an x that's being squared right here, and I also have some x's right there. So this is not a linear equation. This is a quadratic equation because there's an x that's squared. And not only is it quadratic, it's a quadratic that has two different kinds of x's. I have an x squared, and then I also have regular x's. So there's two different kinds of x's in this quadratic equation. So the way I'm going to have to solve this is either by factoring, or my other option would be to use the quadratic formula. All right. Now, both of those are things that we've learned in our class and we've practiced. So the point of this video is not to reteach those two methods. When we worked through the process of learning how to solve quadratic equations, you should have decided which of these methods you like better and then started working with it. I will give you a hint that if you like factoring better, this will work by factoring. So you don't have to worry about getting halfway through the problem and then finding out it doesn't work. Quadratic formula, of course, always works every time, so it never fails. So you can definitely use that one if you like it. But remember, both of these require that before you solve, you have to make the equation equal to 0. So we said that was called get standard form on one side and then equal to 0. And we also said when we do that, we like our x squared to stay positive. And so my x squared is already positive over here. It's already got a positive sign, positive ninja 1 in front of it. So I want to keep my x squared on the right-hand side so that it stays positive. So that means I'm going to start by moving all of these things over to the left. So I'm going to have to get rid of this 10x and combine it with this 11x, because remember, I can only combine things that are like terms. So I'm going to subtract the 10x from both sides. In order to do that, these will cancel. My x squared doesn't change. 11x minus 10x leaves me with a positive 1x. And of course, you can make that 1 into a ninja. Then we need to move the 30. Now the 30 over here doesn't have anything that's like it. So it's kind of like there's a plus 0. It doesn't combine with anything. These will cancel out. That leaves me 0. And remember, 0 is a thing. You have to write it. You can't just say, oh, that all goes away and just not write anything. You've got to write a 0. And then on the other side, I have an x squared. I'm going to make that 1 into a ninja. And then no constants minus a 30 is going to leave me with a negative 30 for my constant. So once you get this equal to 0, this is what you have. And now we can solve it using either factoring or quadratic formula. So again, because this is something that you should be already comfortable doing, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and use whichever method you want, but solve this equation for x. Okay? Go ahead and do that now. All right, so hopefully you have solved this equation for x. I will tell you, it turns out that you're going to get two answers. One of the answers is a 5, and the other answer is a negative 6. Okay, and we talked about that when you have an x that's being squared, we expect that normally you're going to get two answers. That's the normal thing that happens. And sure enough, we've got two answers, a 5 and a negative 6. Now, you might be wondering, well, wait, Mr. Root, I didn't get those. How did you get those answers? So again, my purpose in this video is not to review how to solve this. There's going to be a link to the old videos in the description so you can review that from the old videos. But I will very quickly show my work so that you can pause this. And if you made a mistake, you can find your mistake. So here is my work. If you solve by factoring, this is my work over here. So first I multiplied the first number, the ninja 1 times the last number, 30, 1 times 30, found all my factors, broke up my middle term, did grouping, got the answer. Okay, that's one option. Or quadratic formula, I found my value of A, B, and C. I plugged those things into my discriminant. Then I plugged the discriminant into the formula. I simplified those things. I simplified it once with a plus sign. I simplified it a second time with a minus sign, and I got those two answers. Okay, so if you want to check your work, pause the video right now and compare your work to mine. But I'm going to move on to step number 4 in this problem. So remember, when we solve for X, we're not done. There's still a 4th step. Check for extraneous solutions. So we finished solving the equation. We got a positive 5 and a negative 6. Now we need to check for extraneous solutions. So to do that, what we're going to do is take these two answers and plug them back into our original equation to make sure they actually work. All right. So this was the original equation. I just ran out of room on my other paper, so I'm writing it again here. This was my original equation. So we need to check, do both of these answers, do both of these answers work? Okay, so first I'm going to plug in 5. And everywhere there's an X, remember we talked about, you just plug in 5 for X, but you're going to use parentheses when you plug it in, just in case the parentheses are important. Actually, on this problem, it turns out the parentheses are not important, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. So I plug in those 5s. Now I'm going to simplify this fraction, so nothing happens on the top. I just have a 5. On the bottom, 5 plus 3 is equal to 8. And I'm also going to simplify this fraction. So I've got a 10 on the top, nothing changes there. 5 plus 11 is equal to 16. Okay. Now, as of right now, it doesn't really look like those things are equal, but these fractions simplify, right? Well, this one doesn't simplify, it's already done. But this fraction does simplify. I can divide both of those numbers by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is equal to 5, and 16 divided by 2 is equal to 8. And now these match. So that works, okay? Now, so far, this is just like the last video. We did all our steps, we got an answer, we plugged it in, it worked. You can probably guess what's going to happen when we plug in -6. And since you probably have a pretty good guess, what I'm going to suggest is right now, pause the video and work this through and see if your guess is correct or not. All right, so go ahead and check -6 right now. Okay, so hopefully you've worked this out. You've simplified both sides. On the left side, you should have gotten a -6 in the top, and a -6 plus a 3 is a -3 in the bottom. -6 divided by a -6 divided by a -3 is equal to a +2. So that's how that side simplifies. On the other side, I've got a 10 in the top. In the bottom, I'm going to have a -6 plus 11. That's going to give me a +5. If I divide 10 by 5, I get +2. Oh, look at that. It works. I know I kind of set you up there with the way that I was saying it, made it sound like it wasn't going to work, but it does work. It actually does work. So on this problem, we do end up with 2 answers, and both of those answers work. Now, remember, 5/8 and 2, those are not the answers. The solutions, the answers, the solution set were the 2 numbers that we got when we solved the quadratic equation. Those were our 2 solutions. Okay, so that's it for this video. Like I said, if you want some review for solving quadratic equations, there will be a link to that so you can see that review. And then we will work through some practice problems in class. And I promise you, in the practice problems, you will find that not every answer works. So you'll get to see and experience what happens when some of them don't work. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.